Welcome. You're listening to All Things Naval Aviation with your host, Rear Admiral John Meyer, Commander, Naval Air Force Atlantic.
Welcome to All Things Naval Aviation. This is Rear Admiral John Meyer, your host, Commander, Naval Air Force Atlantic, and today I've got a special guest, Commander Adrian Jope, call sign Catfish. He is the lead of the Physiological Episodes Action Team, or the PEAT, and really great to have you here today, Catfish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for having us. This is a great way for us to get the word out.
It is. You know, you gave you've been doing superb work for the team here for a number of years. You outbriefed the air boss and I now. It's probably a little over a month ago. I did see your TED Talk online, and as I joked with Catfish, you know, TED Talks are supposed to be 15 minutes. His video was about an hour and a half, but man, it is deep. It goes, you know, all the way to the bottom of the issue. But for this audience, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit, you know, just maybe at the very outset, explain the difference between a physiological event and a physiological episode for us?
Yes, sir. So flying in the aircraft, obviously, air crew could get and develop symptoms, and it could be as a result of some pressure anomaly in the aircraft, with anomaly with the environmental control system, or some aircraft oxygen system type OBOGs symptoms. Now, if those symptoms are attributed to an actual failure in the aircraft, that's what we call a physiological event, or a PE. And when we cannot tie those symptoms to a failure in the aircraft, sir, that's when we're looking at a physiological episode.
That makes perfect sense. And, you know, over my years of flying, I've had a couple of events that I think now, with the clarity of hindsight, rapid decompression or loss of cabin pressurization at altitude, or oxygen problems that I've had where I ran out of locks. I mean, I'm so old that the aircraft I flew had locks in the Prowler. But we weren't too smart on those things back then. And this really, I guess, maybe came into the news, if you will, around 2012, I think, is where it started to emerge, and it came to a head in about 2017. We stood up the PEAT. Can you talk about that history of that a little bit?
Absolutely, sir. And we saw a little bit in the Air Force. I mean, remembers the F-22 had some issues as well.
Yeah, there's a 60 Minutes
Yes,
episode that I remember
infamous.
watching and thinking at the same time, oh, bogs, huh?
Right.
Don't we have something like that?
Time.
Yeah, it was.
Yes, sir. So we started tracking these events about the 2010 timeframe, and then we saw a kind of gradual increase and then a rapid increase in 2017, so much so that with T-45, we actually shut down the training pipeline, which, and I think we're gradually getting back to where we were, but that was a major issue, obviously, for the tactical aviation pipeline.
Right, we're still recovering from
yes,
that
sir.
a little bit today. You can't just turn off the pipe for, I want to say it was about 9 months, I think.
It was a few months,
Yeah.
but the nice thing is we've seen a dramatic decrease in Ps, and I'll get to that here in a second. F-18, you know, fortunately, we never had to shut down the aircraft, but it got a lot of attention, rightfully so, from flag officers and obviously Congress. And so there was a comprehensive review that was conducted at PAC Fleet, and out of that, they formulated the PEAT. There was a direct report to VCNO to get after this and try to figure out what was going on with the aircraft. And we did find some stuff with the aircraft, but we also found that, you know, the human has a big aspect and a big role to play in PE. But fortunately, the top line message, sir, is that since 2017, the respective peaks in T-45 in July of 17, and then with F-18 in November of 17, we've seen a 94% decrease in T-45 PEs and a 79% decrease in F-18. So that is really a good news story as a result of the stuff that we've been doing.
Yeah, that certainly is the definition of getting after it.
Sure.
Right, so your guidance was pretty clear, and I think from the formation of the PEAT, you as the lead, but in coordination with BUMED, physiologists, flight surgeons, and outside experts as well, you have gotten after this. Can you talk a little bit about some of the findings that you had, some of the major findings? Because there were a whole lot of findings and things, but we don't have time to go into every one of those.
Right. And so The peat, I would look at our charge as kind of a conductor of an orchestra, where we're kind of top line messaging and getting those different organizations that you talked about, so the fleet and BUMED and academia and industry all playing together to kind of get after this. And what we did was a root cause corrective action where there were 2 independent teams from T45 and F18, about 100 plus individuals, 30 organizations, and about $50 million, where we went to go leave no stone unturned. There were 2 independent teams, and they uncovered 567 recommendations, which we eventually consolidated to 466. So that's a lot.
It's not a lot of consolidation, but that is a lot of stuff to get
It
after.
is, and we're tracking that to 0 right now. We're closing those out. We're about 60% complete since we started doing that. But we outbriefed RCCA in February of this last year, all those recommendations. And some of the major top line key findings, and I think everybody was hoping for that smoking gun,
Right.
and we never did find that, sir. We found kind of a stacking of degraders, and the Safety Center.
Right, and important with that, with those findings, is also, I think, very important is what you didn't find.
Right.
So that's, you
Yes.
didn't find the smoking gun.
Yes, we didn't, but we found some things that, there was a lot of information or some conjecture out there what we thought it was, and these are some pretty major things that I'm going to say, but we did not find contamination. 20,000 plus samples. We found stuff as what OSHA would consider an irritant level, so parts per billion, where most of their standards are in parts per million. So that was done with those samples, but independent toxicologists looked at as well. So that OBOG's air was very, very clean. What we've been educated from the get-go as aviators, we've always heard of hypoxia and decompression sickness. And that's all we've ever really talked to or trained to, and it's neither. It's not hypoxia, and it's not decompression sickness.
And hypoxia, just for the audience, is a lack of oxygen.
Yes.
So if you're breathing what you think is oxygen and it doesn't have the requisite
Requisite
oxygen, you effectively become oxygen depleted.
Yes, sir.
Hypoxia,
Yes, sir.
right?
And the OBOGs, again, putting out very clean air, non-contaminated air, but producing high-quality oxygen, but never below 21%. And a lot of aviators didn't know that. I didn't know that before I came to the team, that the OBOGs cannot take oxygen out of the air. So below 10,000 feet, that's ambient. That's what you need. That's a big thing that we're getting into the systems knowledge and into aviators' minds of the training. And with DCS, I mean, to have decompression sickness of kind of the dive type injuries that we talk about, where we were doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy for a long time, we haven't treated a pressure-related PE with HBOT for a year now. And it really tapered off a lot over the last couple of years because that was not really the mechanism of injury. To have a rapid decompression at high altitude, that's where you would result in DCS. So a cabin altitude of 18,000 to begin with, which is about 44 to 45 aircraft altitude, it's pretty high up, and we don't always find ourselves very high up in that regime. So again, altitude and then a rapid D, potentially could have that nitrogen coming out of the system or out of your solution, which would result in DCS sickness.
Right, so we didn't find that. No decompression sickness, no contaminants, and good clean air coming out of the OBOG system.
Yes, sir.
Right. So what did you find?
So we found that, and I think aviators would be very happy to hear this, and we were restoring confidence in the aircraft. I don't think there was a lot of confidence a few years ago. We're gradually getting that back by driving this down, but we didn't find any design flaws per se with the OBOGs or the ECS. Didn't say that we couldn't tweak some things, and so we've done some slight redesign to make them more fault tolerant, but one of the big things is that we added life limits to these parts. A lot of these were designed for fly to fail, and that just wasn't the right way of doing things.
Yeah,
but
especially when you look at extensions in service life
Sure.
of aircraft, maybe we should have perhaps
Sir.
caught those earlier,
Yep.
but the fact that we've identified them and we're getting after them is impressive.
Yes, sir. You think about the center barrel replacement, keeping the airframe
Right.
alive, but what about the guts?
Right.
So we've done that, but one of the really neat things that kind of came as a result of PE was, aviators carry these little orange devices called slam sticks, and what that does is it measures the pressure inside the cabin at either a 1 hertz or 10 hertz, so 1 data point per every second or 10 data points per second. We found that when you pair that with the aircraft maintenance unit data, the MU data, and we get enough of that from a bunch of different aircraft in the fleet, that we start to be able to kind of build the environmental control system. And aviators, I think, were very concerned about pressure-related PEs, and rightfully so, because there were aviators that people knew that were down for quite some time. But we were able to really get after the pressure side of the house, and we've dropped pressure-related PEs since the institution of Heart by 88%, which is a big drop. And that really started kind of in March 2019. It's fully outfitted throughout the Growler and Super Hornet fleet as well as Legacy Hornet. But what we do is we build the ECS, and then we start to see parts fail before it actually registers in the aircraft. So we develop what we call an MSP code, which basically would tell maintenance that, hey, you need to go change out the S-bar or some other piece in the environment control system. But also it's before aircrew even realize that there is an impending failure, so they might write a gripe for some cycling pressure in the cockpit. So again, it's predictive maintenance, and this is a huge thing for naval aviation readiness because you're able to pull the aircraft into the barn, not only fix it and do the targeted maintenance on that part, you're potentially preventing a PE from happening in the first place, and that's probably why we're seeing a large decline in PEs. And the nice thing about Heart is we're scratching the surface. We can start using this for other systems in the aircraft, the fuel systems, the power plants, generators. But it's a neat find that we found as a result of this whole RCCA and really PE effort over the course of the last 3 years.
Yeah, that's the part to me that's really impressive, is to take that slam stick data, marry it up with the MU, and then kind of get predictive and remove parts before aircrew ever even notice something. Probably the most telling point for that is early in the evolution of slam sticks in the MU data, we had an instance where there was some indications of a failing component. That information didn't get to the maintenance department in time, and then sure enough, before they could actually swap that out, we had a PE in the aircraft. We were fortunate that it was a relatively minor PE,
Right.
but I think it was that point that really reinforced to the air boss and I that no, this is absolute. If this flags a component, that aircraft's down, we change that equipment out or that component out, and then we restore it to up status. Now you haven't stopped there either, though. So there's
No.
other things, and I've used the slam stick. It's not the most convenient thing.
Right.
You carry it in your flight suit pocket on your shoulder, and then you pull it out, and you kind of have to do some
Right.
download, and it's not perfect.
Yes.
But it is perhaps a Band-Aid step. But you're still
Right.
working on some other ideas, aren't you?
We are, and so all this data actually goes down to what we call a supercomputer in Orlando, and then gets filtered back up through the teams at the various fleet concentration areas, and then eventually the maintenance desk. We're working stuff to put it actually into FAME so that you can download it right when you get back from your flight, and stuff will flag. That's forthcoming here in the
Right,
coming
so no
months.
third party required. It
Yeah, at
basically
that point.
downloads, maintenance control gets the information and immediately knows
Yes,
right then and there. They don't have to send it off and wait for the analysis.
Yep, and it's a neat thing that's going to obviously help the readiness piece as well, but again, preventing PEs from happening in the first place. But yes, we are developing the cockpit pressure and O-box monitoring system, so the CPOMs, which is going to be installed fleet-wide across all platforms. I think it's one of the largest installs we've ever done in naval aviation history, but you're actually going to have it in the aircraft that's downloadable plane side after a sortie. Then it's going to give you information of how is the cabin pressure holding up inside the cabin with the environmental control system, but it's also going to give you information and data coming off of the O-box as well.
That's fantastic progress coming out of the superb leadership and work and investment of the Pete. There's another issue, though, that I want to touch on, and that is the issue of the aviator themselves, ourselves, as we. I don't get to fly that much anymore. I'm not sure you get to fly much anymore,
No,
Catfish.
sir, I wish.
But
yeah.
I've always viewed it that we're very much like a college or professional athlete. That when we go to fly in that aircraft, if we aren't well rested, well hydrated, in good shape, keeping up with our workout routines and all that, in good health, we really got no business getting in the cockpit. So can you talk a little bit about the human aspect of this as well?
I can, sir, and that's a great segue. I mean, when we first started looking at this from RCCA, it was like, what's wrong with the aircraft? We got to get after the airplane and fix this part, and we just didn't find it. We found a couple things in T45, which were design changes that have helped things. A simple idle tweak in the RPM gives more flow to the mask. That's good. We didn't find that in F-18. But we started to kind of really look at the human as well and be like, wait a minute, there's, the most complex system in the aircraft is something that needs to be looked at as well. And when you use the analogy of being a professional athlete, that's what we are. I mean, there are less of us than there are NFL football players that fly these type of fighters. And I try to tell my wife that. She makes fun of me, but I think it's pretty neat. But you need to come to the aircraft every day in tip-top condition. So well rested, well hydrated, well nourished, and in tip-top condition. When you're flying twice, or you're burning the candle at both ends, or you're drinking lots of coffee, or you're tactically dehydrating because you don't want to have to use a piddle pack, that's wrong. And you're setting yourself up potentially for an injury if a malfunction does happen in the aircraft. And you see that where aviators will fly an airplane and they'll have the same sort of perturbations in the aircraft on one day, but then a different aviator gets in that same airplane the same day, has the exact same thing happen in the aircraft that may not be normal, and then there's symptoms that result. So part of that too, sir, is education and understanding your systems in the airplane, how the environmental control system works and how the OBOGs works, and we're getting that in the NATOPS.
Right, and I think we've added the NATOPS. Gets thicker over the years, and this is a new addition of a lot of detail.
Yep.
So we have a better understanding as operators of how these systems work.
And that's right, sir, and that's exactly what we want to do. So you have to understand the system, how it works, and how it protects you, but you also have to understand your system and your physiology and how it relates to the aerospace environment. And that, hey, there's a lot more out there than hypoxia and DCS that can get you, and that we play a role in this. And so the aircraft definitely has been part of the issue, and we're getting after that with all the stuff that we've talked about thus far. But the humans, we've got to do a good job of educating, and we're doing a lot, sir, to get after that. So the NATOPS changes, we're adding language to 3710, and I'm happy to elaborate on some of those things.
Well, we've changed some of the procedures as well for mask wear as well. And so as a Prowler pilot, I flew with oxygen, liquid oxygen in the aircraft, and we would routinely take our mask off to conserve LOX, was what we would tell ourselves. And actually you had to do that for some really long missions with only 30 liters of LOX and 4 aircrew. But the F-18 was always different from the outset. It was where you wear your mask 100% of the time except for minor relief. And what we found is that below 10,000 feet, you can't get hypoxic. I mean, scientifically, you can't get hypoxic. So pop your mask off, and now you're breathing 10,000 elevation ambient air. And it was Doc Wells that was really adamant about that, who has been a member of the Pete as well on the team here. So can you talk about that aspect a little bit, about maybe some of the procedural changes as far as that goes?
I can, sir, and you're right. So, OBOGs, I think, came on around lot 13 or so. Some of the earlier Hornets had LOX, but, you had to conserve it. And so guys would take the mask off. With OBOGs, like, oh, well, we have this endless amount of oxygen. But I already talked about, what you bring to the aircraft. And so if you come tactically dehydrated, you breathe oxygen that has no actual moisture to it, and you're sitting in this gear for long periods of time doing these 7-hour plus missions now, you think of it, and we always use the analogy of how good does it feel to actually take your snorkel off when you've been snorkeling for a while. It feels pretty good. Take that mask off and fill your lungs. But 94% oxygen, as we have in the T-45 and F-18, it takes out all the other gases and kind of shoves more oxygen in there, right? It takes away nitrogen, and nitrogen is a really important gas that actually keeps our alveoli, those little like balloons at the end of our lung structure, that actually where the gas exchange happens and the oxygen goes to our system.
So nitrogen, for the record, you're not a doctor.
I'm not.
But you've clearly been hanging out with a lot of doctors on the Pete.
So Doc Hoffman,
you start talking about alveoli.
And Alan Hoffman. I mean, I hope I'm going to do this justice, but we're sending oxygen to the body, and so when the nitrogen actually deflates, when the lack of nitrogen deflates your alveoli, you have what's called absorption atelectasis. And if you stay on that oxygen system, now there's no nitrogen in your system anymore. It's affecting gas flow. The only way to really replenish that is to pull the mask off, take some ambient air from the cabin. That's going to help. But the other things that we've seen with the mask stuff is that we have seen issues with the mask itself, where you have a sticky exhalation valve from saliva or these long periods of time where it just kind of sits sealed shut, or crumbs, or other things that get in there, and you essentially have to blow out that exhalation valve. But again, it's a work of breathing issue that kind of sneaks up on you. And some of those things that we talked about earlier, sir, like hypoxia, the same symptomology for hypoxia is very similar to what we call hypocapnia, which is an excess blow off of carbon dioxide, which drives breathing. And so you don't know what's happening. Your body is an amazing system that's just trying to kind of compensate. Next thing you know, you can get things pretty out of whack, and the symptomology is the same as hypoxia. So we really want to tell aviators it's okay to take your mask off to kind of clear the mechanisms for the reasons I've talked about with, the OBOGs and what it's doing with the nitrogen. But also, if you're having issues breathing, that, hey, get down below 10,000 if you take your mask off, control that rate and depth of breathing, and you probably, hopefully, can get away from a bad path that you might be going down if you're trying to breathe on something that's not working.
I thought some of the other interesting findings were some of the issues of training our parachute riggers, our
Right.
PR community, on how to properly size and fit our equipment, some of which we think was restricting that ability
Right.
to expand the lungs and, take a really deep, fulfilling breath as part of the issue as well. But I mean, you guys really left no stone unturned. I will tell you the investment was worth every penny. I think it reinforces the fact that our people are, in fact, our most precious resource.
Yes, sir.
Really appreciate your leadership in this regard. It's important to emphasize, too, though, that we're not done. I mean, it's not slap the table, here's the report, and disband the Pete. You're going to continue on this process, and I would argue that as long as we have any PEs, that's too many. I mean, we're certainly driving this to zero. So Catfish, to you and the entire team, Doc Hoffman, who was here with you as well, and others, superb work.
Thank you, sir.
So, this is Rear Admiral John Meyer, Commander Naval Air Force Atlantic. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us today. Oscar out.